Hello! Welcome to Aviva Studios. I'm so excited for this video. It's going to be quite long. I'm going to share a bunch of drawings that I've drawn over the years. I hope you like it. This is going to be broken up into sections. I'm going to start with the story idea I came up with when I was 12, and then began to develop more when I was 15. I created a story called Zephyr and the Elves of Trellis, but then changed it to The Elves of Trellis, as you can see on the cover. The story was about an elf with bright red hair called Peeta. I called her Peeta when I was 13, but I changed it to Phaedia when I was 15. I got the name Peeta from the Hunger Games, because I remember my sister read the Hunger Games, right, and I opened up her copy, and I just took the name Peeta from it, right? Peeta doesn't sound very magical, right? So, and it's not very interesting, and it's also from the Hunger Games, right? So I changed it to Phaedia. The first draft that I completed was very simple, and it had no character development. Phaedia finds an imp in the Forest of Trellis, and then she brings the imp to Empress Destiny, right, the Queen of the Forest, so that he can have a home. Uh, the story actually ended on a dramatic cliffhanger where the villains of the story snatch the imp away and pull him out of the forest forever. But I've decided to rewrite the whole story and change that cliffhanger. You can read my old draft on Wattpad. I'll put a link in the description. I'm going to tell you about my new idea, which seems right because that new idea does not exist on the internet, right? So this is the only place you can learn about my new idea. So here's the new idea with all the new world building I've come up with. I actually have no idea what the title of this should be because I decided that I don't want the main characters to be elves anymore, right? So I kind of have the word elf in the title because the characters aren't elves. I'm calling them the Bandashi, which is a name I thought of when I was 12, but for some reason I didn't, I don't know, I didn't have the gumption to put it in the story, right? Because I guess I didn't want to be unique, which is weird, right? So I'm going to call them the Bandashi. They're some magical creature with some kind of magical power that I haven't figured out yet. Right? They're called the She for short. And there's also dryads and fauns and fairies, right? But like Phaedia is not an elf, she's a she. I believe the word she is Irish Gaelic for fairy. It doesn't sound too good on a title though. So I've been thinking about calling the book The Masks of Trellis or Destiny's Masks, since the mask that Phaedia is wearing on the cover is a gift from the Queen of the Fairies. I don't know. I'm kind of lost. But I don't know. Destiny's Masks sounds kind of interesting. Right? It sounds like something I might pick up if I was a kid. Okay, so I've talked about the potential title. Let's get into the plot. Okay, Phaedia is one of the Bendashi. She's 16 years old, and she lives in a part of Trellis called Timber. And Timber is where all the goods of Trellis are made. In the beginning, I'm going to start with Phaedia working in an assembly line, right, where they construct boots to wear, right? And Phaedia makes her own boots, and she makes her own clothes. And they make clothes for other people in the forest, and they sell them. And then a large army, right, of these little gray creatures with long tails come running through the forest, and they steal a bunch of stuff, right? Because the Bendashi make potions, right? And they steal stuff that you can use to make potions, and they run away. Phaedia meets up with a boy that I called Joshua. Probably I'm gonna change that name. The reason why I called him Joshua is because when I was a kid, Joshua was like a cool name to me. I changed my mind though. I think Rowan is a cooler name for me, right? So she meets up with this elf called Joshua for now, and they say, okay, how do we deal with these creatures that are stealing our stuff? Because no doubt they're gonna come back for more, right? So they decide to go to the chief of the fawns. What's the chief of the fawns' name? Is it Rensed? I wanted to use something aggressive, right? So they go to the chief of the fawns, uh, who they live peacefully with, right? They live peacefully with the fawns, despite the fact that the fawns, unlike the she, eat meat, right? So they're vegetarians and they eat meat, right? But they're okay with that because they're part of the forest and there's plenty of animals that they like in the forest who also eat meat. When the chief of the fawns hears that there's these little gray beasts running around stealing, right? He knows exactly what they are, right? He knows that these little gray beasts are imps, right? And imps are like lesser demons. So he gets a bunch of bows and arrows and a group of fawns to come and shoot the imps, right? And he shoots them and they fall down dead. And then they carry the bodies somewhere. Now, that is not what Fadia wanted. She kind of just wanted to have some kind of protection to put around their stuff so that the imps couldn't get in, right? But then he just goes and kills them. The chief of the fawns, Rinsed, has 5 wives and 12 children. One of his children is called Rowan, and there's definitely going to be a side plot with him, but I'm not sure what it's going to look like. Fadia goes back to the circle of sheep that are working, and she asks them, hey, do you know anything about imps? Do you know anything about demons? This older lady tells her that yes, she's seen them many times before. They used to come a lot more frequently when Fadia was like young, and she was too young to remember, right? When she was like a baby. And they used to steal things too. They are sent here by the witches from the north because the witches make potions as well. Witches in my world are half human, half demon, right? Half human, half succubus, and they have powers and they make potions. Or at least that's one type of witch, right? So there's black witches, and they are half human, half demon. And I thought about making like other kinds of witches, like white witches and red witches, but I'm not sure what they'd be like. So Fadia learns some information about witches and imps, but then it starts to rain, right? So they pack up their stuff and they go home. The Shi live in trees, right? They carve doors inside trees and they live inside them, right? I thought it was such a cute idea, right? And they carve little spaces in the trees to put their clothes and to put a bed, right? So she goes into a tree that she calls Genevieve, and the tree opens up its door for her. Before she can get to sleep that night, Fadia hears something scratching the tree. She hears something scratching Genevieve. So she comes out and she sees an imp, right? An imp that was not killed. This one is different because it's wearing a white tattered shirt and it's got gold earrings. Fadia tells the imp to quickly come inside because she's worried about what the Shi are going to do when they see a demon. So that night, the imp sleeps with her and Genevieve. The next morning, Fadia hides the imp in a blanket and then takes him to her friend Yasmin, who's a dryad who lives nearby. She doesn't take him to her friend Joshua because Joshua seemed to have less of a problem with the imps being killed. So Fadia decides to go to someone with a different opinion. Yasmin is worried about the imp, but she like warms up to him when she realizes that he's touching her things and being very so careful, ever so careful not to scratch them, right? So she decides, okay, I'll help you with the imp. We'll take him to Shimmer, which is where the fairies live. The fairies live in Shimmer, and they probably won't do anything bad to an imp that isn't dangerous. Because the Bandashi can talk to animals, Fadia goes out and finds a pony called Falar, and they ride on Falar throughout Trellis. They're going on a little adventure. This is probably a good time to mention the side plot that I thought of. I'm thinking of a side plot that involves the masters of the creatures, right? So we have the chief of the fawns, and we have the lord of the elves, right? Chief of the fawns, Rensed, lord of the elves, Glaspell. So Rensed and Glaspell find out about a harpy that's come to Trellis. I say harpy, but the creature I created is more like the Japanese tengu, right? Which I really like. I love the Japanese tengu. You should definitely check that out. This harpy is a very important character that I'm definitely going to write about in other books, right? Because this is going to be a whole series. The harpy is called Razu. And Rensed and Glaspell have learned about the harpy, and they're trying to like find him and talk to him. I'm not sure about what, right? So I got this side plot in my mind, but I'm not sure where it's heading. But I really want to include the Masters of the Forest. There's the Chief of the Fawns, the Lord of the Elves, and the Spirit of the Dryads that comes in the form of a giant elk. right? And it's like magic and it's like green and blue, right? This wispy thing. So there's going to be a side plot with them, the harpies and the monsters of the forest, that and they eventually interact with our protagonists. I'm not sure how it goes down yet though. Fadia and Yasmin come to a place called Copper, where they meet up with a half she, half banshee, right? So half banshee and half banshee called Kalo. And he lives in a shack, right? Not a tree, but a shack. I decided for a backstory for him where he was kind of a troublemaker in Timber, so he kind of got sent away, or like he got shunned, and then he moved out of Timber into Copper, where there was a shack, and the shack was apparently built by humans a long time ago, right? Because these creatures don't build houses, right? Because the shack they live in is made of tin and it's got a chimney, right? And they don't build stuff like that, right? So it was made by humans a long time ago. Carlo says that his twin brother, Tali, is in Shimmer, and he might join up with them. He also warns them about this creature looking around that he calls Cynthia. Carlo has cooked some nice warm soup, so they eat that with him and they sleep in his shack for the night. The next morning, the she pass by. The next morning, the she and the dryad and the half banshee pass by a goblin territory, and the imp is interested in the goblins. But the imp can't tell them how he feels because demons can't talk to fairies. Like, only demons can talk to demons. So, imps can talk to witches because witches are half demon. I'm not entirely sure if Carlo follows them on their journey because I'm not sure if there's enough space on the pony. Fadia and Yasmin go to the River Shanai and they meet Prince Francis. They call him Prince Francis because he reminds them of the Queen of the Fairies, Destiny. Um, he and his family move around the world in a wagon, like a gypsy wagon. In order to get to Shimmer, Prince Francis has to carry them over the River Shanai. And he does. He carries them over in this lovely green boat uh, where there's mermaids in the river that have journeyed from the sea, right? And this mermaid called Nixie tries to kiss Prince Francis, and a male mermaid called a Macklemore tries to push their boat over, right? And he does it. But the water fairies who live around the river really love Prince Francis, so they save him immediately. And then a fairy called Roxina saves Fadia and Yasmin and the imp. And I thought I might add like this part where like she steals Fadia's power, but I'm not entirely sure what her power is. So I need to figure out what that is so that it can be stolen. I was thinking about giving her fire powers. That would be useful. And then Roxana takes the fire powers away, right? And that could come back in a later book, which would be awesome, right? So I'm not sure I want to use fire powers. It seems kind of cliche, but like some kind of power that can be used in a sequel would be great. But the idea is that she takes Fadia's power and then she like laughs and flies away, right? And then comes back for a sequel. I don't know. Maybe it's a bit too silly. I don't know. The harpy called Razu is chasing after Zephyr for reasons we don't understand, right? Oh, and Razu is the reason why we know what the imp's name is, right? Because he apparently knows the imp's name and he calls out, Zephyr, you won't get away from me. And that's how they learn what his name is, because the imp can't talk to the elves. Roxina took away her powers, so now she doesn't have a defense against Razu. Right, so I'm not sure how they bypass him, but I don't know, they gotta bypass him somehow. Wait, or maybe he actually wins. Maybe he actually does get Zephyr. Right, and then they have to like find a way to get him back later. Yeah, I have no idea how that encounter goes down, right? But I do remember this scene that I created in my first draft. At night, after they cross the river Shanai, they hear the cry of a banshee, right? who they later learn is Kahlo's mother, right? But I have no idea where that storyline goes, right? So they just hear Kahlo's mother, and I'm not sure what to do with her, right? There's so many ideas I thought of that I have no idea where they go. And then after the Banshee part, they come to Shimmer. They meet, uh, they meet the Queen of the Fairies, Destiny, and this is where Destiny gives Phaedia that blue mask you see on the cover of the book, right? The blue mask is the mask of wisdom, right? And it has the power to transform her into a fox. Why did I choose fox? Because I just like foxes that much, as you can tell. Yasmin also gets a mask. I'm not sure what the mask is. I called it the Mask of Diligence because she like stood by Pheidia's side during this hard task and she didn't give up, right? But I feel like it's gonna have a better name, right? She gets a mask too. I think maybe the mask is green, and it turns her into a falcon. They also meet up with Kahlo's twin brother Tali, but I'm not sure what to do with that situation. I'm gonna try to summarize the ideas I had for the ending. Zephyr ends up living with the goblins because he really liked them. Phaedia and Yasmin fight off Cynthia, which turns out to be a corrupted dragon, right? And the witches have corrupted the dragon. And you can tell that it's corrupted because in this world, dragons don't have leathery bat wings, right? They have feathery wings, right? So the dragon is corrupted because it's got the bat wings when it should have the feathery ones. I need to write a storyline for Kahlo and Tali, definitely, because at the end, they're supposed to be rewarded with masks from Destiny, right? So, wait, Kahlo gets the Mask of Cunning, which turns him into a rabbit, and Tali gets the Mask of Courage, which turns him into a bear. And I also thought that Joshua would get a mask too, and it would turn him into a wolf, right? And he was supposed to have the Mask of Loyalty. But I have no idea what his storyline is, right? Like in the original story, he had the Mask of Loyalty because he was constantly thinking about Phaedia and trying to get back to her, right? But I'm not sure if that storyline works. Like it's gonna be something more than that, right? The idea is that he finds out that Phaedia is gone for reasons he's not sure of, and then he tries to seek her out throughout the whole book, and that gets him the Mask of Loyalty. But that seems kind of weak as a storyline and as a character progression. So yeah, so at the end, we try to ward off a dragon using these special masks, right? So Phaedia turns into a fox, and that's useful. And then the imp finds a home, right? Pretty good. There's my story. If I could only figure out the bits and pieces in between, right? Like the stuff with Roxina and the things with the Harpy Razu. Now I'm going to talk about the ideas I had for the sequels. I actually wrote a sequel and finished it. It was called The Witches of Malwikia, which I changed to The Witches of the North. That book was about a witch prince called Alistair and his sister Violet. But I've decided to change the entire thing, right? So he's no longer a prince. He's a poor boy called Alistair, and I like that more because the idea is that Alistair is going to be the villain of the story, and he's going to have a sort of like hero's journey in a way, where he starts off with nothing. He starts off poor, and because of that, he cannot afford these gemstones that witches use to become more powerful, to project larger quantities of power. So he can't afford those gemstones. So he works harder to build up his strength and becomes one of the strongest witches in the North. And I find that interesting. Like the villain has a hero's journey where they become stronger. They start off at the bottom, now they're here, right? I like that, and I really want to write a villain protagonist. Ooh, I'm not entirely sure if the original book idea is on Wattpad. If it's on Wattpad, I'll put the link in the description. If it's not on Wattpad, I don't know what to do. Cause I got the story on a USB, but like, how do I share that in a simple way, right? Because um, the story is broken up chapter by chapter. So if it's on Wattpad, it'll be easier to share. I hope it's still there. I thought of a new idea for this story where Alistair is not a prince, like he's a very poor boy who's evil, right? But he trains his magic a lot because he has one virtue, patience, right? I like the idea of giving a villain a virtue, right? He has the patience and the dedication to train himself up, build up his magic, and become the most powerful witch in the North. Um, and then he does something evil, right? He like tries to take over. And there's a trio of good guys who tries to stop it. Graphius, Kimin, and Sephora. So there's a story here, but I just haven't figured out most of it. But I know there's witches, there's vampires, there's trolls, black witches, white witches at some point, red witches, right? There's so much to it. I also like to show you some magical creatures that I drew that would probably fit in this world. I'm not sure what I would call these magical creatures, but here they are. I thought of a third book and a fourth book whose plots are kind of vague, right? So the third book is called The Fire Fairy. In this book, the Queen of the Fairies, Destiny, is dying, and she does not have an heir. So she sends Yasmin on a journey to find an heir, called the Fire Fairy, right? And this fairy will rule the fairies when she's dead. Uh, right, but then Alistair, the witch, right, gets his hands on the fairy before Yasmin. So she's got to get her back from Alistair. Right, so Alistair is a reoccurring villain throughout the series. There's going to be a lot of villains. Alistair is the biggest one. The fourth book is called Thalazin's Temple, and it focuses on the Hapi Razu, or the Tengu. Right. Thalazin is Alistair's uncle, and I think he's a good guy. I have no idea what this plot is going to look like, but I think it involves creatures from Trellis. I definitely want Thalazin to be a good guy. I think there was like a period where he was a bad person, but I've changed my mind. Right? He's definitely going to be good. I have no idea what this temple is about. I think I was thinking that Thalazin had like a bunch of slaves in the temple, but then I don't really remember thinking that. Wait, but I changed my mind. He's gonna be a good guy. I don't know what his temple is about though. I had this grand plan about writing 12 books in the series, and the 12th book is about saving the world, right? The 12th book would be like a doomsday plot. And I like that idea because after the 12 books, after 11 books, you would have seen the whole world. You would have seen the elves, the witches, the vampires, trolls, all kinds of creatures. So you would have seen the world. And in the 12th book, you'd be more invested in the idea of saving the world because you've seen all these lands and you don't want them to be destroyed. It would be so cool if I could only write. I think that's pretty much it. Moving on now. The original plan for this video was to show a bunch of other drawings that weren't related to my Bendashi series with the witches, right? But I think this video works a lot better as just a video about that story. I'm glad, I'm happy with the way this turned out. I hope you enjoyed this. Have a nice day.